Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Tupel, and welcome to Craftsy's Christmas in July. I know July, it seems so crazy that we've made it to July already this year. Time is just flying by. And that means we are getting ready with all of our crafting projects in order to get ready for the holiday season. Because we all know we put off our craft projects as long as we possibly can, and then we are like scrambling at the end trying to get it all pieced together and just perfect for gifting season. So welcome to Christmas in July. I am making cinnamon rolls today, and I want to share just a little bit of information. You can see I have a recipe downloaded. There is a link to download your recipe as well. It's going to take you to the landing page on Craftsy for all of our Christmas projects. There are lots of fun gifting ideas in that download for you. So I'm excited that you can get all of them today, which is fantastic. You are absolutely right, Angie. Angie is already commenting, which is fantastic. We are making cinnamon rolls, and truly, as Angie says, you cannot beat a good batch of cinnamon rolls. And let me just tell you that this is by far my favorite cinnamon roll recipe ever. The dough is perfectly light and fluffy, but still very moist. And so you get that like chewy bite to it as well. And of course, that cinnamon sugar filling in the middle just makes these absolutely fantastic. Glad Robin is looking forward to this as well. So excited to see you guys commenting and chatting. Please feel free to use that chat box throughout our tutorial today. If you have any questions at all about what I'm doing, or I'll be asking you guys some questions too, so I want to hear from you as well. But make sure you download your recipe. It's a fantastic recipe. I make it every Christmas. This is one of my go-to recipes at the holiday time. And the main reason for it is because I can actually make this one in advance. Now, we can't make this 6 months in advance and make sure that they're good for the holiday, but you can easily make this recipe up to a month in advance, freeze it, and then pull out the proofed dough that's already mixed with your lovely cinnamon filling and let them rise. So I will share that process as we get a little further into the recipe today. But that's why I love this recipe, because it's very flexible. You can make your dough, and from start to finish, you'll end up taking about 2 hours to make the dough and bake them off. So it's a fairly fast recipe, considering that there's lots of rising and then rolling and more rising. We've got all kinds of steps in here, but it's easy. So don't fret over the fact that there's lots going on in this recipe. It's actually quite simple, and anyone can do this, I promise. But the other reason I love it is because it's a dish that you can throw in the oven first thing in the morning. You can make it however far in advance, up to a month, but then you can pull it out and you can just toss it in your oven on Christmas morning. Go enjoy opening gifts or celebrating with breakfast or whatever it is that you'd like to do while those cinnamon rolls are baking off. It fills the home with such a wonderful holiday scent. That cinnamon just really takes over the room. It makes it smell absolutely delicious. And of course, it gives you time to go enjoy your festivities, whatever it is that you're doing that morning. So I know for me, this is something that I do every holiday. We literally, there's a big tradition. Nobody's allowed to come down the steps to the Christmas tree until mom is up with makeup. Yes, I put makeup on every Christmas morning. We all come down once I've had a moment to get the hot chocolate ready and put the cinnamon rolls in the oven. And I always have a little platter of cookies. And then we can go and enjoy opening a few Christmas gifts by the tree while everything is baking off. And then once we're finished, of course, we have a delicious treat to enjoy as well. So it's been a part of my holidays a minimum for 23 years now. My husband and I have been married for a while. So we've done this every year for the last 23 years. That was the tradition that I started with my husband. We, as a even younger girl, we made something called Jolly Breakfast. Anyone know what a Jolly Breakfast is? That is very similar to a cinnamon roll, which is why I sort of transitioned to cinnamon rolls. But a Jolly Breakfast is basically like a biscuit dough that's rolled in cinnamon and sugar, and it's little individual. It's kind of like monkey bread almost, and it's just kind of thrown in a button pan, and you bake it off and you flip it over, and everyone kind of takes some chunks from it. And that's absolutely fantastic too. That one is a pretty dense recipe just because of the biscuit dough that's there. But that's the real reason why I shifted over to this lighter cinnamon rolls, but it's absolutely delicious. Kathleen, I'm so glad you can smell the cinnamon in the air. It is definitely one of those smells that just brings back memories of childhood and Christmas, and they're just the best. So why don't we get started by making this recipe together. Again, make sure you download the recipe. There's a lot of extra little tips and tricks in the directions for you because I am full of information, and I love to be able to share that with you to be able to make these cinnamon rolls exactly the same way that I have. And I'll share some of my favorite brands and things along the way too, because I want you to have the best cinnamon rolls that you possibly can. So I have already measured everything out. And in the recipe, you'll see that I'm asking for a cup of warm milk. Now, there's a couple of things with the warm milk that you just should be aware of, and that's simply the temperature. And what we're trying to do is make sure that our milk is warm enough to activate our yeast, but not so hot that it kills it. So yes, yeast is one of those things that actually is alive. And so we need to make sure that our products that we're using are keeping it sustained and making sure that it's doing what we want it to do. So this is 1 cup of warm milk. I'm actually using the fast rising yeast this morning. It's 1 packet, but the fast acting is about 120 to 130 degrees for the yeast to actually get moving. And that's important, again, because we want it to really grow and double in volume. I've also got salt and sugar going in here. That's going to help feed it. That's what makes our yeast like so happy. So don't forget those. Make sure that you've got the right measurements and everything. And then I also have softened butter. This is room temperature butter. So it's super, super soft. And that is just going to allow it to not cool down our mixture at all. And, you know, if you're putting cold butter and cold eggs into a warm mixture, you know, 100 degrees isn't that much. 120 is a bit more, obviously. But we just want to make sure that we don't have cold ingredients cooling down that milk so much so that then our yeast doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So just a little hint for you, make sure you warm up your milk in the microwave. You can do it on the stove as well. Microwave's a little easier. And then you just want to put all of those ingredients into a mixing bowl that hopefully is attached to a mixer that can do all the work for you with a dough hook. If you don't have a stand mixer like this, you can absolutely do the same process just using a hand mixer. Most hand mixers these days do come with a dough hook attachment. So, you know, don't fret. It's totally fine. The other thing that you can do here, if you would like, if you don't have either of those options available to you, then you can absolutely do this just whisking it at this stage and then kneading in your flour slowly. Now, it's going to be a messy process with your hands, but it's worth it in the end. So don't stress over that. Once all those ingredients are into your bowl, then you're going to slowly add in your flour. And from a flour perspective, it's 3 cups. You just kind of want to slowly add this in. If you wanted like dump a cup in, let it mix, dump a cup, that's fine. I like to pre-measure everything just so I don't forget any of the ingredients. I am really known for getting distracted because I just have too many things going on and my brain is always like in overdrive. But so Valerie is asking, what do you recommend when using yeast to get all your dry ingredients prepared first and then warm the milk? Yes. So I have a tendency to, I pour all of my ingredients out. So wet and dry. Make sure everything is there. Make sure I don't have to run to the grocery store because I've forgotten that I don't have any more flour or whatever it might be. And then I toss that milk in the microwave, warm it up, and I actually use my thermometer. So this is it's a lovely meat thermometer, obviously, but I use it for all sorts of things, not just meat. But I do a lot of baking, and so especially with bread, you want to make sure that your milk is the right temperature for your yeast. So don't hesitate to just drop your thermometer right into the milk. Make sure it is the right temperature before you start mixing it up, and you'll see it actually only takes in my microwave about 1.5 minutes. And so I always start with 1 minute, let the milk warm up, and then I'll add another 30 seconds or whatever I need. So oh, yay, Barbara, you already made these and you used your bread machine, which is absolutely fantastic. Makes it way easier. I absolutely agree with you. I actually have used my bread maker with this recipe as well, because you just throw everything in. You don't even have to think. You don't have to knead it. You don't have to pull it out and let it rise. The bread machine does everything for you, which is just amazing. So yes, great suggestion. And I'm so glad you enjoyed these as well. It is such a lovely recipe. It's so light, delicious, and airy. It's so good. So once the dough starts to pull away from the sides like it is now, it's going to kind of gather around the hook. That's exactly what you want it to do. If it is really still sticking to the sides, then you may need to add a little bit more flour. And I just kind of keep a little bit of flour off to the side. And if I need to add more, I can. So the recipe calls for either 3 to 3.5 cups of flour. And what I tend to do is I had 3 cups of flour in already, and then I'm going to test it. And this is pretty wet. If you touch it and it comes out on your finger, then you need more flour. So what I'm going to do is I actually just have extra flour, and I take another 1/2 cup. I don't use it all at once, but I have a 1/2 cup because I know I don't want to use more. Well, that's 1/3 of a cup, but my 1/2 cup actually has powdered sugar in it right now. But I'm going to take a measuring cup that's a little bit smaller, or right at that 1/2 cup, and I'm only going to put a little bit in at a time. But I don't want to go over that 1/2 cup because it will make your dough very tough. So if it's too dry, or you have too much flour incorporated into it, your dough will be dry. It will be tough. It won't have that same chewiness that we all love and know a great cinnamon roll to be. So don't overdo it on the flour, but add in a little bit and see what's happening. So what I can see is that there is still some dough on the bottom. And for the most part, it's coming away from the sides nicely, but that bottom dough is really stuck. So I'm going to go in and just scrape it down, and then again, see what it does. And the difference these are different for every single person who makes them. And the reason is that is mainly humidity. Our flour could be a little dry if we're in a really dry environment. So it might be that 3 cups is perfect for you. Or you could be in a really humid environment where it is just sticky and tacky. And I just have a couple spots that are a little tacky. I'm just going to add a little bit more. But you have to make that judgment call on your own as far as if you need more flour or if you need less flour, or if maybe your flour was so dry and at 3 cups, you're just like, whoa, super dry. Really need to, add a little moisture. Milk is the key here if you want to add more. But you can see now it is all just hanging on to that dough hook. That's what we want. We want it to be dry enough to hang on to the dough hook, but not too dry. So you'll notice I didn't use that whole half cup. Maybe, well, I guess that was a third, but I didn't use the whole thing. But it comes out of our bowl nice, and you do want to get, some of that stickiness at the bottom. But if you can, toss it back and forth in your hands and it's not sticking to your fingers, then that's the perfect consistency. And I can tell this is maybe, I've got some dough on my hands already, but this is perfect. It's got just this moisture to it, but when I touch it, it's not sticking to my fingers. So that's what you want. And you want to grab, I just used the same bowl that I had my flour in and just hit it with a little bit of spray. This is just a flour spray. What you're going to do is go ahead and set that right inside your bowl. You're going to go ahead and put a flour towel over it. This is a flour sack towel, just like that. And you're just going to set it aside for an hour. Now, when that hour is up, I've already made another batch for you so you can see what it looks like. But you want it to double in size. Let me show you the difference. It has doubled in size very quickly, actually, depending upon how hot or cold your kitchen is. This can rise very quickly, or if it's cooler, it will actually take a little bit more time. So that hour is just a guide for you. Look at your dough, see how big it has grown, and that's what's going to tell you when it's ready or not. So this one I actually have let sit for about an hour. It's perfect. It's risen exactly like it's supposed to. The yeast obviously did its thing, and now we're going to let this one do its thing as well. So if you have a warm kitchen, you're probably looking at 45 minutes. If you have a cooler kitchen, then you're looking at closer to maybe an hour and 15 even. One way that you can speed up this process, let's pop over to the front cam real quick. But one way you can speed up this process is just by putting it in the oven. You want to warm your oven to about 100 degrees. You don't want it to be too hot, but you can put this in the oven with your towel over it and let it rise that way as well. Okay, so once we have our dough that's risen, we're going to sprinkle a little bit of flour on the surface of our counter. Make sure it's nice and clean. Just a little bit of flour. Let's see if we can get this a little closer so you guys can see what I'm actually doing here. Bear with me for just a moment. All right. So what I've done is just put a little bit of flour on the surface. Do it however you'd like. If you want to throw it out there and be all jazzy, that's fun. But then you just want to flip your dough out. You'll probably need to help it just a little because this is sprayed, so it's going to stick just a little. And what I like to do is use a little bit of flour right on top too, just because there is, that layer of oil with it. And you have two options. You can knead this if you would like. If you feel like this is really sticky and it's, just staying to your hands, go ahead and knead it with a little bit more flour. There's nothing wrong with that. If it comes out and it's perfect and you're just like, yep, just gonna start rolling this baby, go for it. That's the fun of baking, is that there, yes, it's a science and there's some judgment that comes into it, but have fun, break the rules sometimes. I know I love breaking the rules. So, and this is something too that you could really get your kids involved or your grandkids involved. There's lots and lots of portions of this recipe that kids would do really well with. They can definitely help you roll. They can measure ingredients and mix it all together. So this could be a really fun recipe to make with your kiddos or your grandkids. And my whole purpose right here is just getting this dough moving. So one thing that you don't want to do is overwork your dough, because it becomes very tough. As we know, that gluten starts to come into play. But you do need to get this dough moving. Now, if this dough is warm, it's just risen, it's going to roll out really easily. If you have refrigerated it overnight, might be a little tougher to do right away. I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to show you a little trick. So first, I'll come back. If you guys saw, every time I'm rolling, my whole piece of dough is moving with me, and so it's not stretching very well. Just flip it over. The other side is a little tackier because it doesn't have as much flour. So now it's going to stay where I want it to stay and actually start to stretch and move and get into the rectangular shape that we're looking for. So that's just a little trick, especially, if you overfloured your surface, that's definitely something that can happen, especially if the kids are involved. They get a little too excited and throw a lot of flour out on the surface. But once it has stuck like that, you do want to flip it back over, because this is, you've got a beautiful, beautiful piece, but it will now stick on the opposite side as well. And our goal is to get this evenly distributed, but around 16 by 20. So if you need to pull out a ruler or some measuring tape, by all means do that. I tend to just eyeball it at this point. I've kind of gotten pretty darn good at measuring things with my eye. But just for the sake of knowing where we are, so we're at just over 20, and we are at 15. So that's good. I'm happy with that. If I wanted to really be picky, I could, but there's no need. So I'm going to let this sit for just a moment, and we're going to mix up our cinnamon mixture. So what we're going to do here is simply take brown sugar. Now, I do recommend using molasses, so that's a dark brown sugar. You really want to do that. It is so much more flavorful than the light brown sugar. The biggest difference is simply the amount of molasses that is incorporated into this brown sugar compared to a light brown sugar. That's literally the only difference between them. And it's just got such a richness to it. It's got way more flavor. So I do encourage you to use a dark brown sugar. The other thing I recommend is Saigon cinnamon. Now, I know that there are lots of varieties out there. Saigon has just a little bit more of that kick to it, in my opinion. It's got a little spice, obviously, because it's cinnamon, but it just has a richer flavor. So the combination of the dark brown sugar with that extra molasses in there and just a slightly richer cinnamon, my goodness, it just makes such a difference in your recipe in the end. So 2 tablespoons of cinnamon, You've got a half a cup of butter and a cup of dark brown sugar. Now, I know there's lots of ways for people to make cinnamon rolls. I have seen people melt the butter and drizzle it and then just sprinkle your brown sugar over top. And of course, that cinnamon sprinkle too. I personally like to have a paste mixture. I just feel like it holds better. It stays where it's supposed to be a little longer as it's baking. And it just, oh my gosh, this cinnamon, I could just eat this with a spoon. I know that sounds sounds crazy because it's just butter and sugar, but oh my gosh, those two combined together are just the best. They, gosh, love it, love it, love it. It's so tasty. So I did see that I missed a little question. Let me talk about that while I'm just mixing sugar here. The question is whether or not you can use bread flour or would it make it too tough? I don't recommend using bread flour. And you're exactly right. It's because it makes it too tough. Bread flour has a higher protein content in it, which just really has a lot, just a thicker texture to it. On the same note, I don't recommend using a pastry flour in this one either. Pastry flour is much lighter. It specifically tends to be used for cakes or lighter baked goods. So you want to use the right dough for the right project. And this project, for whatever reason, is just absolutely perfect for making cinnamon rolls. So just use an all-purpose flour. You don't need, anything special. I just have an all-purpose flour. It's perfect. Bread dough and pastry flour are, they've got different ratios and consistencies of, the gluten and the proteins and all that good stuff. So just an AP flour is all you need. Now, once you have your mixture together, I'm just going to kind of distribute it across the dough somewhat evenly. Doesn't have to be perfect, but don't miss any of it. My goodness, either that or lick the bowl, right? I promise, let those kiddos lick the bowl. For me, that was one of my favorite memories growing up in the kitchen. I know there's a lot of concern now about salmonella and lots of foodborne illnesses with, raw eggs or even raw flour these days, which is, hard to believe sometimes, but let them lick the bowl. Those are the best memories. I love it. So all you're going to do, as you can see, is just spread this cinnamon butter mixture all the way across your dough. And you want to try to evenly distribute it as best you can. And you do want to get all the way to the edges. Now, depending upon which edge you plan to roll towards, that's what you want to, avoid. I have a tendency just to leave a little, half inch to an inch. Doesn't have to be much, but just so that the cinnamon mixture isn't going to come, pouring out of my roll. Then I go all the way to the edge on the other side. Again, just make sure you don't have any big, huge, thick areas. Don't stress if your dough rips a little bit. It gets rolled up. Nobody's going to notice. No biggie. All right. So this is why I like the paste, because I can actually get it even and I can get it exactly where I want it. I'm not, just sprinkling and, maybe have, an even distribution, maybe not. You just want to make sure that this is a nice consistency. And, you don't want to skimp either. This is the best part, This is what's going to make it so flavorful and delicious. So then you literally, let me see, I'm going to move my camera just a little because I realized that edge is off. But all you want to do is ever so slightly, just start to lift that dough and roll it. And if you need to, you can pull and pinch. That absolutely works too. You don't have to pull and pinch, but what that pulling does is it stretches out the dough. It makes a thinner cinnamon roll. So, depending upon if you like a thicker bread, like that dough, once it bakes off, it will be either thicker or thinner, depending upon what you'd like to do. But then once you have that first roll going, you can just roll it up and it comes together really nicely, nice and smooth. It's a beautiful, beautiful roll of dough. I have a tendency to just squash up my ends a little bit because those ends, remember, there isn't as much cinnamon right up against the edge unless you really take your time and get all that mixture to the edges. But I just like to squash it just a little. It tends to taper out at that other end as well. And certainly we want all of our cinnamon rolls to taste delicious, not just the ones from the middle. This is just dental floss. Now, I know a lot of people say you should only use unflavored dental floss. That doesn't exist in my home. And I didn't run out to the store just to get unflavored floss. But I'll tell you, you don't taste the mint when you're cutting with this. Now, you could certainly use a knife, but that tends to squash your cinnamon rolls. So if you are looking for a perfectly round, beautiful cinnamon roll, this is the only way to get that. And that's just by using some cinnamon or using the floss to cut your cinnamon rolls. And I recommend cutting this into about 16. That's usually the number that I get out of my rolls. If you did a slightly smaller roll of your dough, you will get fewer, but they will be bigger and puffier. So, use your judgment there. But you literally just slide the floss underneath the dough, and I find my halfway point, and then I just continue to divide in half. That's all you have to do. So each one of these is just going to continue to get divided in half. So now I have, I'll actually get 16 out of this because of the way that I am cutting it. So I have a tendency just to go under the whole thing again. So this one's going to get cut in half, and you can see the process. Sometimes you got to lift it and roll it out, but look at this cinnamon roll. Like, that is like the perfect cinnamon roll. If you want big, huge, thick cinnamon rolls, you don't have to cut this in as many as I'm doing. And like I said, I do 16. But you could easily just do 12 and have some really, really thick, delicious cinnamon rolls. So again, I'm just going to cut in half. Oh, I snagged it. So cut in half, cut in half, cut in half. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's nothing tricky, but you could absolutely, like I said, do as many or as few as you would like, just depending upon how big or small you want your cinnamon rolls to be. And if they fall apart, just tuck them back together. That's sort of the beauty of this dough. It's very forgiving. All right, I'm almost there. One more. I just love this dough. It's so soft. It's so plump. It's just divine. Why, thank you, London. I appreciate your comment. She said those are so perfect. Yeah, I mean, that's just the beauty. I really think it's the product, right? It's the dough. It's the type of flour you use. It's the type of, cinnamon butter that you're mixing. And then all you want to do is toss this in your baking pan. So give me 1 second just to kind of rearrange here for a moment. It's a little harder when we're working with the camera, right? Just making things fit where they belong. I always give it just a little bit of a spray. These are pretty flavorful, buttery. It's a buttery dough. So I'm not too concerned about sticking, but it is just a safety guard. Now, if your cinnamon rolls are really large, you're probably only going to get 12 in here. But I'll show you what I like to do with the rest of the ones that are left over. You could use a bigger pan if you really wanted to. You could absolutely just tuck these babies in there, and I'm going to swap this one out for a larger one. I like to put all of my like really pretty large ones in one spot. And then with the ones like the ends, for instance, these ones, you've got a couple options. One option is to make individual servings, just using a little muffin tin, and they fit perfectly. Now remember, we're gonna let these rise a little bit so they fit perfectly. Another option is you could put them in a festive baking pan. This is a bread baking pan specifically, but I have already made some cinnamon rolls. These have been rising for about a half hour or so. Just before we went live, I pulled these out and let them rise. So you have a couple choices. You can always tuck those in. So what you'll do from there with this is cover it back up with your tea towel and let it rise again. You want to let it rise at least 30 minutes. So I'll show you the difference between the two. They're almost doubled in size again. You want the dough to be able to rise up and really get fluffy before you bake them off. So that's the key to getting that really light dough, is making sure you're letting these rise the appropriate amount of time. So I, of course, have already let some dough rise. Let me bring that out so you can see it. Look how beautiful these are. This is the difference between one that has just been rolled out and placed and then one that has risen. And I absolutely love it when the centers like pop up a little bit more than the outside edges, because they take on like a new shape. So these are going to go in the oven. It is set to 325, and it's going to be about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm setting my timer for 15 minutes. I want to make sure that I'm going to add another one in here, I think. And then we'll just see the difference between one that's not risen and one that has. I love just being able to show you guys the difference and like why I do what I do, and why I, tell you to do one thing or another. I'm going to get this surface cleaned up real quick, but it's important to follow the recipe, exactly as it is. Don't swap out too many different flavors, or for instance, your butter. It should be a salted butter. Don't go for the fake stuff to try to cut calories. It's one of those things that I firmly believe anything in moderation is the way to go. You want to make sure that what you're making is absolutely delicious. You can't eat the whole pan, but, have one and really enjoy it. Not, don't go for a full calorie, high fat, all high sugar, all that, and eat the whole pan, because then you're not going to feel well, right? But I believe that you should be able to splurge when you want to splurge, but you can't splurge all the time. But this is a recipe you don't want to change. You don't want to swap out for low-calorie butter or a sugar substitute. Use the good stuff. All right, so I've got another question. And the question is, how can you prepare these days before and then bake them the following morning? Thank you for reminding me of that. So I mentioned that tutorial that you can absolutely make these in advance. So what happens is you're going to bring it to this state. So you want to make your cinnamon rolls, put them in your pan, and then cover this and put it in the freezer. You don't let them rise first. So as soon as your dough is covered with your cinnamon mixture, put them in your pans or in your tins. If you're going to use individual tins, or if you want to gift these and you're going to put them into just a bigger aluminum foil tin, you can absolutely do that. I love gifting things inside of the baking vessel, like this beautiful porcelain baker, because it's an extra gift, right? And so for those people who maybe you want to splurge a little bit more for, get them a really nice pan and have them baked in it. And then you're going to wrap this with saran wrap, throw it in your freezer. You might need a deep freezer if you're going to do a lot of them. They do take up space because of the way that they're in the pan. But that is the way to do it. And I would recommend no more than a month in advance, because you will start to get freezer burn and you'll have the moisture coming out of the cinnamon rolls, and you'll see it condensing, unfortunately, as ice on the saran wrap. So no more than a month in advance. But then when you're ready, you have two choices. If you're going to gift these, gift it with the recipe and the instructions to bake them off. If you're just making them for yourself, then pull them out the morning before from the freezer. So Christmas Eve morning, in this case, we're going to pull our cinnamon rolls out and put them in the refrigerator. They're going to defrost overnight. And in the morning, we're going to preheat our oven and toss them in and bake them off for 15 to 20 minutes, whatever your oven might take. And they're ready to go. That's how simple it is to freeze these in advance. Now, you can absolutely add nuts, raisins. You can use other spices like pumpkin spices, some nutmeg or allspice, to give these a little bit more pizzazz. So thank you, Penny and Cynthia, for asking that question. You can absolutely add more flavor or texture to these cinnamon rolls. I have a nut allergy in the house, so as much as I love adding pecans, I can't. But that shouldn't stop you. One way you can do that is either roll up those items inside of it. So raisins, for instance, you'd absolutely want to roll up inside of your cinnamon roll. But if you are wanting just to be able to allow guests to top their own, you can bake these off individually, and we're going to make the icing to put on them. Put your icing on it, and then have toasted nuts on the side. So if somebody wants to add some toasted nuts to the top of their cinnamon roll, they certainly can. And so that's a great way to be able to accommodate a lot of people and allow them to pick and choose. Absolutely. I hope I don't pronounce your name wrong, but I'm going to say Otica. Yes, you can absolutely put these in the refrigerator. So the dough that I showed you that we rolled out this morning, I let it rise and I put it in the refrigerator overnight. And then I rolled it out today with you guys. So you can absolutely refrigerate your dough in a couple of different areas. If you want to, if you're making dough late at night and you don't want to wait for it to rise to put them in a full state of cinnamon roll before refrigerating, you can refrigerate the dough as is. This is all you need to do is cover this. I prefer to let it rise and then put it in the refrigerator with a little bit of saran wrap on the top. But let it rise, chill it overnight, or you can probably go a few days with this dough in the refrigerator, to be honest. And there's no real risk of anything going wrong with it. It wouldn't last in my refrigerator because I would want to eat them, so I would be mixing that pretty quickly. But you can absolutely do just the dough, and you can freeze just the dough too. So, if you feel like you don't have the space to be able to roll out your cinnamon rolls and put them in pans and freeze them, you can absolutely do that. So you can make your dough in advance. I do recommend letting it rise and then refrigerating or freezing. And then when it comes out, you'll, roll it out, put your cinnamon sugar in it, roll them up, and then let them rise again. So you've got to just think about the process a little bit of how and when you can make those changes. But it's really all about making sure the yeast has an opportunity to do its job and rise up, and then bake it off. So just keep that in mind as you are working through the recipe at home, and make those choices that are best for you at that point. It just depends on what you're looking for. Okay, let me rearrange just a little bit, because now we're going to make the topping. Now, there are two different toppings that you can make. One is just basically a buttercream topping. It's just butter, sugar, and vanilla. And there's another recipe that is a cream cheese based recipe. So make sure that you have made a good choice about which one you want to use. The one that I'm sharing with you today is just a buttercream. It's just that sweet icing that we would normally find on a cinnamon roll. But the cream cheese icing is super easy, and only for the people who join live. Only for the people who watch this video, you will get a second recipe. So what's really easy with this recipe is it's a stick of butter, a cup of powdered sugar, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla, a half a teaspoon of vanilla, sorry, and then a little bit of milk. And that milk is just if you need it to change the consistency to make it spreadable. Again, because our powdered sugar sometimes can be really dry. Stick of butter, cup of powdered sugar, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of milk. If you want to turn this into a cream cheese icing, you're just going to do an equal amount of cream cheese to butter ratio. So I have a half a cup, which is a stick of butter. I'm going to do a half a cup of cream cheese if I want to do a cream cheese icing. That's how easy it is to make a decision between the two. So your choice as to however much you would like to do, go for it. There's no right or wrong answer to the cream cheese. It just is what it is. If you like a cream cheese icing versus just a sweet sugary icing, go for it. Whatever preference you have. All right, so then with this, you're simply going to put it in the mixer and let it run for a couple of minutes just to get it going. And again, if you need to add a little bit of milk, you can absolutely do that. Make sure you're using room temperature butter. That's the other thing that's there. Susan's asking, don't they have to rise once thawed? Yes, so remember, you're going to put them in the refrigerator for 24 hours overnight. Set them out on the counter. If they're really cold, yes, they will need to rise again. It depends on what process you're doing. If you've done this and you've not let them rise and you froze them, which is my recommendation to you, then yes, you need to refrigerate these for 24 hours, then set them out on the counter, half hour maybe, depending upon how warm your room is, and then bake them, okay? If you have already let them rise because you spaced it, they rose, you put them in the freezer, you pull them out, just toss them right in the oven. You do need to go through the steps though, regardless of if you're doing just dough or cinnamon rolls, into the freezer, pull them into the refrigerator for 24 hours, then pull them out and either let them rise for a half hour, or if they're already risen, just right into the oven. So there's a lot of flexibility with these. I know, most people just want a straight answer, and I can't give you a straight answer because there's so many options. You can do it a lot of different ways. It really just depends on what setup you have, what kind of time frame you're looking at. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it. Ideally, let the dough rise on the counter, then freeze it. if you're going to then roll it out and make your cinnamon rolls. If you want the least amount of hassle, bring them to this state. Don't let them rise. Freeze them, and then defrost and let them rise when you're ready for them. So that's as simple as it's going to get. All right. So thank you, Susan, for that question. That's a great question. Wanda is saying, I wish I could attach a photo in here. My cat is watching the printer print the recipe. Oh my gosh, how adorable. I love my animals. I've got a pupper. He's, gosh, 6 now, I think. But he too loves watching. He likes watching TV, actually. All right, so let's take a peek at what we have here. This is our just our buttercream that's going to go on the top. This is the icing. It is nice and smooth. It's going to actually work really well on top of our cinnamon rolls. So I don't need to add any milk. I think a lot of it just depends on how cool your butter is when you put it in the mixer to see, you know, if it's cold, it's going to be a thicker mixture. You might need to add a little milk in order to get it moving. So there's that. I'm curious what some of your recipes are that you love around the holidays, though. Do you have traditions? We have just a couple more minutes before we're going to peek in the oven and look at these delicious cinnamon rolls. But is there a breakfast item, or is there, you know, like, do you cook a ham or a turkey every Christmas? Or tell me what it is that you guys do as traditions. I want to know all about them because maybe I'll take that tradition for me as well. While you guys are entering those into the comment section, one more thing that I love to do is, I mentioned earlier, I get to come down ahead of time. I get the cinnamon rolls in the oven. I make hot chocolate. Hot chocolate is another one of those things that I don't know that we've missed a hot chocolate on a Christmas morning. When I married my husband, his family tradition was that everybody had a Santa mug that they drink hot chocolate out of on Christmas morning. And so when I married into the family, I got received my own Santa mug to drink hot chocolate with all of them. And of course, when my son was born, we got him a Santa mug as well. So that is one more, I would say, food related, not necessarily food itself, but definitely food related, and a fun one. Everybody likes it a different way. Sometimes marshmallows, sometimes whipped cream. So it's always fun to see what they enjoy, and it changes each year. Textures are one of those things. I'm going to pull these out just so you can see them. They may need to go back in a little longer, but let's see what they look like. Oh, goodness. Yes, those look delicious. All right. So they are going to go back in just a little longer because I want them a little bit more golden. Let's go overhead, though. I want to show you what these look like real quick. They are really starting to, I mean, obviously they've grown a lot and that cinnamon mixture has just oozed all over. But I want that dough to just be a little bit more golden. There's a couple hints of golden. So we've got a little, you know, a little browning happening. I just want a little bit longer. So maybe just 2 minutes, 3 minutes max. And we'll go from there. So one of the other things I want to mention, just because I saw it, is when our cinnamon rolls in, when you see that like center puffing up, part of the reason it does that is if you don't have a really tight roll. So if you don't like that, do a really tight roll on your cinnamon rolls, and then they won't, you know, pop up in the middle on you. I love that. I just think, you know, they like overflow and they're ooey gooey and they just look absolutely delicious. So for me, I don't mind that, but some people like them to be all pretty and perfect and, you know, nothing overflowing out of the center. London, oh yay, we do an egg bake every Christmas morning and lasagna at Christmas night. That's lovely. We used to do an egg bake too, but my husband doesn't like eggs, so I got rid of that tradition when I got married. And it looks like Kathy says a Christmas lunch with turkey and dressing, ham, butter, beans, corn casserole, and yeast rolls. My mouth is watering. That all sounds absolutely delicious. I could eat that right now. It's one of those things that we don't make it very often, right? Like we look forward to that special meal that brings us all together, and that, wonderful special meal that just hits those heartstrings and gets that those mouth watering flavors going. Wanda says cinnamon rolls is a favorite at her home, and the best ones are homemade for sure. You're welcome for the icing directions. The icing on top is not always a necessity, to be honest. Cinnamon rolls can be fantastic without the excess sugar on top, but I like it because it just adds a little bit more moisture and a little bit more flavor. And Lily says, usually a banana nut bread served with hot milk tea. Yum. And for breakfast while opening gifts, that sounds delicious. And the smell is so good and enticing. Yes. I wish we had smell-o-vision. Maybe I'm dating myself with Emerald, but he used to always talk about smell-o-vision, and I was always like, yeah, I get it. But like, when you're smelling it, you just want to share that with everyone. The smell is just phenomenal in here. It's perfect. I can smell. It's almost like a nuttiness too, because it's just so good. Okay, let's pull out these cinnamon rolls. All right. Okay, so cinnamon rolls are definitely done. I've got my second little batch over here as well. And the difference between, the ones that had an opportunity, luckily this is cardboard in it, you can touch it. I'm going to show you over the cam here, because this one in the middle was one that I added in. These other four I made technically last night and this morning. So I let the dough rise and put it in the refrigerator overnight, and then rolled it out this morning to bake them off. But this dough, even though it didn't have an opportunity to rise, it really took off, which is great. And these other ones did well, but remember, these are the ends. These are the ones that I have a tendency just to set aside, and these are the ones we eat. And the big, beautiful, lovely cinnamon rolls that, all looked fantastic, not our ends. My goodness, they just bake up so nice. So now you have a choice. I know, choices. Choices are hard sometimes. You can put your icing on right now when they're hot, and it's just a dollop. And then you just let that icing drip into the center of those cinnamon rolls. They get ooey gooey, super delicious. They're so tasty. You can also let these cool so that they're just a little warm, not hot, but just a little warm. And what will happen is this beautiful icing will actually just sit on top, and it's more creamy. You're going to have a creamy texture rather than something that's just, melted and gotten all ooey gooey on the inside. So your choice. And honestly, you can do it both ways. You can do a little now and a little later if you really like. Whatever tastes the best to you. I think it's always a personal preference as to whether or not you use icing or the cream cheese, and whether or not you put it on now so it can like melt into it, or whether or not you're going to put it on more as a topping that has a slightly different texture. So let me just get the rest of this icing on here real quick, and then let's pull one out, because cinnamon rolls are best eaten hot, in my opinion. I love to say hot, ooey gooey cinnamon roll. They're so good. So good. But yeah, there's so many choices to be made. It's entirely up to you as to how you decide you want to do that. Well, let me grab a plate real quick too. All right. I even have my holiday spatula out for you guys. I love snowmen. So Christmas time around here is snowflakes and snowmen. Look at that, you guys. It is so delicious. It's fluffy. Oh, look at this. It just like pulls away. It is so delicious. Hopefully you guys will just go run off and make your own today, because it is just fantastic. I see a question. I'm going to ask or answer a bunch of them for you, because if you have more questions, throw them in now. We've got we're out of time, but we're going to answer a couple more questions. It says, do you have an orange recipe? So I don't personally have an orange cinnamon roll recipe. If I had to guess, though, just a little bit of orange zest and a tiny bit of juice in the cinnamon filling would be absolutely fantastic with this as well. Citrus and cinnamon, well, orange, I should say, not lemon and lime. Orange and cinnamon work really, really well together. And so you could just do a little bit of zest. That would be how I would do it, just because I love this recipe. And if I wanted to enhance it a little bit, just a little bit of orange zest over top of our cinnamon mixture would be absolutely fantastic. But I'm sure there are several recipes out there that you could take a peek at. You could always use the dough recipe from this and then just swap out any ingredients that you need for an orange roll. And Katie, I'm with you. I love the middle pieces, the ooey gooey center. I just want to like fall apart and melt my mouth. That is like my absolute favorite. So, and Wanda says, yum. Yep, I'm right there with you. These are so delicious. I hope that you guys try this recipe. I hope that you enjoy it as much as my family and myself do. We love cinnamon rolls. It's filled with such a lovely smell in the home right now, and it just makes me want to celebrate with my family. So I hope that you have all enjoyed this. Merry Christmas in July. Get all of those crafting projects started. Be sure to pop over to the main page. There's a link in the description for you just to see what all of the other projects are. There's some really fun stuff like purses and all sorts of things that maybe are a little too much for me to do. I prefer just to bake at the holidays, but hopefully you'll find a couple of projects that you really love and want to make, and maybe even make it a holiday tradition for you and your family. So thank you again for joining me, and Merry Christmas in July.